Humans of the cardboard, welcome back to Just Nuts, guys. Today, I want to do a post-ban list discussion video talking about Metaverse. I think this is one of the more interesting unhits, I should say, on the ban list here. Obviously, Mystic Mind going allowed Metaverse to finally come back, which I loved. I've talked about this on multiple separate ban lists while we were kind of hoping mine would get hit over the years. And I had said, if mine gets banned or even put to 1, maybe we can get Metaverse at multiple copies, and we finally have that here. Very excited. We're going to be going through all the generic options as far as field spells that Metaverse becomes a lot more interesting because of, as well as some archetypes that actually become way better because of Metaverse. That could be very, very nice help to those decks in getting access to their field spell that really rely on it. So that's what we're going for today, guys. Let's just jump into this thing. If you don't know what Metaverse does, it takes a field spell from your deck and it either adds it to your hand or activates it immediately. So keep in mind, anything that would any field spell that would have an effect that activates when it's activated would not be able to activate here, would miss timing. So it doesn't work as well in those decks. We'll talk about that more when we get to the archetypal field spells, because that's generally where we see those kinds of cards. But yeah, let's get into it with the generic stuff to start off here. Number one, it's got to be Necro Valley. Especially this format, Necro Valley is just insane. Tier has, sometimes Tier can just straight up lose to Necro Valley by itself. Depends exactly on what they have, but I believe they can't banish stuff for Bestials. They can't banish Keldu and Mudora from Grave. They can't trigger any of the tier names in Grave because they would be removing themselves from the Grave to resolve their effects. They really have so few options on like what they can do from this point. Now, if they can get to a rank 4, they can maybe make something happen. Get to some links, they can maybe make something happen. But man, they kind of need like Heartbeat exactly and or ways to those kinds of cards to make stuff. To get like a card like this outed or post side, like finding just side deck cards. So yeah, Necro Valley is just a house right now. It's good. There's a couple different decks, not Flunder, and that's one of the troubles of the format is like if you have a deck that's really good versus Tier, you might also have a deck that's really bad versus Flunder or vice versa. There's not a ton of decks that are amazing versus both those kinds of strategies. So, but Necro Valley is just so good versus Tier, and we're expecting that to be a Tier 0, if not still the best deck in Tier 1 format going forward. Next up, Zombie World. Another one we've seen over the last couple formats. Actually seen a couple decks play this right now. Like Tier will play this with like Banshee because they can like mill the Banshee and then Banshee gets some Zombie World. And it just craps on Flunders. Flunders is one of the scariest matchups for stuff like Tier right now. And a card like this just pretty much turns off their entire deck. And it does have some hindrances to Tier as well. I don't believe they can make what's her face. What's her name? Kit Kalos while this card's on the field, because I think they need an Aqua for Kit Kalos, and this makes everything on the field and in the grave all zombies. So it kind of makes things weird that way. So it's interesting. It also makes certain like fusion. It just makes some of their fusion plays like really awkward. So I don't hate it. I think it's a card that'll come up over the course of the next couple of years. And if your deck can and want to play Metaverse, I think this could be another card you include, whether it's in the main or in the side. I think this and Necro Valley will see more side deck play in the future, just because there's going to be matchups they're great against. There's going to be matchups where they do nothing against. So you just want to be ready. So maybe in the side, if your deck already plays Metaverse, could be a good option. Secret Village of the Spellcasters, I don't really need to dig too deep on this one. I don't know how amazing this is in this current format. Tier doesn't play a ton of spells, but just saying no to any of them, to all of them in hand, even if it's just one, it just is blanking that card. It's just essentially a negate for that, or if there's two, and then more and more, the more spells they open. This card's insane. You got to be playing in a spellcaster decks. Keep that in mind, but definitely something that's interesting for sure, that getting access to a field spell like this on the fly. Next one is Summon Breaker. These are the more cheeky ones, I would say. So it says during main phase 1, if the turn player successfully conducts their third summon of a monster or monsters this turn, it becomes the end phase. So the idea here is that once your opponent, and I think this card works kind of like Summon Limit, where it doesn't have to be on field to count all 3 of the summons. It just says conducts their third summon of a monster this turn, so it doesn't need to be like while it's up. They can literally use an effect. Like if they fire a Tier name in Grave that would be doing a fusion summon, and it would be their third summon. Like, they've already done one summon, they've already done two summons, they're triggering a tier to do the third. You can chain Summon Breaker, or like if they're activating a Bestial, any effect that would summon essentially. You chain Metaverse activating this. When they resolve that summon, it now becomes their end phase immediately. That could be something that's pretty interesting at like keeping certain decks from really playing into you going second, because you just cut them off like before they really get into any of their payoffs for their plays. Not a lot of decks are getting a ton done on 3 summons. They need to go a little bit further than that, especially more of the combo-based ones. I mean, even like Flunder, like on the 3rd summon, just make it end phase. Like, they're just done. Like, they just lost, like their turn is passed, and they don't get to do anything. If it goes to end phase, even if they were trying to search the trap off of the I always forget, the Penguin, they don't get to set it because it goes to end phase. You can't set an end phase. So there's some really interesting applications for this card, but it is going first card, not that great going second. But it is a card that like could be kind of cheeky at times. And the last one here, I think, for the generic options is Extra Net. It's pretty cool. Just being able to activate this. It says if a monster is special summoned from the extra deck, the opponent of the player who conducted that special summon draws a card. Normally you would look to play this in a deck that isn't really summoning from the extra deck and just get this up, and every time your opponent goes into the extra deck, you're just drawing a card. It's pretty good. It's like really bad max C, but really bad max C could still be like a decent card. And just with the amount of decks that play with the extra deck, like this is going to be 95% online, like normally. So I think this card's pretty cool. It's pretty cheeky, but again, those last 2 options are more cheeky. The first 3 were really the main big ones, I think, to look at today. So now we get to the more archetypal options. I want to start by mentioning stuff like Hidden City. I already mentioned at the beginning of the video that any of these field spells, and there's like 30 of them now in Yu-Gi-Oh!, that on activation, they search a card in their archetype. They do not get to activate that effect because they will miss timing if they're activated directly off Metaverse, because they're all when effects. I think all of them are when effects. And so you're probably adding this to hand. Now, that being said, in something like Subterror, you could tech a card like Necro Valley, where if you need an immediate floodgate to threaten your opponent, cool, you can get the Necro Valley. But if not, and like you kind of feel like you're already in a decent position, but you just haven't really gotten as much Subterror stuff going, like you just drew a heavy trap hand, you'd be able to just search City. You wouldn't have to activate it immediately, and it's just in hand for next turn. And then you have your 1 card get you into your Subterror engine on the following turn. It's slow, but there could be multiple options there, especially if you're playing some of the other field spell techs as well. Like I said, the Necro Valley, there could be some options there, because Subterror is definitely one of those decks where, you know, drawing Guru by itself is not that great. You really, really, really want to see City. So this could be a copy of City. It is slow, but the deck's already slow. So like, if as long as you have enough stun stuff to like hold your opponent at bay, getting this later could still be good. Labyrinth. This is a really good one. This card really makes Labyrinth feel so much stronger in everything it does, especially when the new trap comes out. As you're resolving effects, you're actually interrupting the opponent. Whereas otherwise, like, the engine doesn't interrupt the opponent on its own ever, really. And so that's like really solid to see. I've talked to some people and they're just like, yeah, my whole goal when I duel Labyrinth is like keep the field spell off the field, because that way eventually they'll run out of traps. Eventually I can like hold them off at bay. But if they're continually popping things, continually triggering like all these effects, getting a monster back off this card is like a lot of what the deck needs to do in order to maintain its advantage. So yeah, like Metaverse being able to access this is really nice. Plus, you don't want to play too big of a Labyrinth engine in your deck, and so sometimes you have a lot of hands where you draw 1 Labyrinth card. Maybe it's just Ariana, and if you have a search, you're like, I don't want to search the field spell because I don't have Welcome Labyrinth yet. I have to get Welcome Labyrinth. And then you don't have the field spell. So having Metaverse in the deck gives you more consistency of finding that. So I think it works. And again, you could tech in a copy of Necro Valley. And even if you don't feel like you need Labyrinth, get Necro Valley and just stun tier out of the game. So it's cool. Generator Boss Stage. This is another really big one. I mean, this is a field spell that does stuff on the opponent's turn pretty much exclusively. I mean, it can do some stuff on your turn, but mostly on your opponent's turn. I mean, summoning from deck, giving you 1,000,000 tokens. This card is amazing, honestly. I really, really love this card, and I love that there's an archetype built around it. Obviously, it has downsides of having to play the bricks in the deck, but this is just a great deck that really wants to see this card. I don't love the generator trap that, like, activates boss stage, then gives your opponent a draw. I know it triggers boss stage even if you've already like missed your opponent's draw phase. But man, that feels so bad. And like every deck searches in Yu-Gi-Oh! So I feel like it's not that crazy to like wait and get your opponent to activate an effect that would add something and then chain Metaverse to get boss stage up, so that way you're going to get that effect to summon. So I don't know. I love not giving my opponent a draw. I think that might make Metaverse just the better card for this archetype. And as we know, this archetype is boss stage, boss stage, boss stage. If your opponent's only going to try to remove boss stage to beat you, so you have to have ways to keep getting them up and maintaining them. That's where I think the extra Metaverses could come in handy. So yeah, it's really sad. Lair Darkness, I've talked about this in spades over the last couple of years. One of my problems with the deck is that the engines don't really intersect, or at least pieces of the deck don't intersect. Lair is so crucial to your strategy, but you don't really have ways to search it. So now Lilith can actually pretty consistently get us to Metaverse then to Lair. So that's really, really good. That means Ties of the Brethren with Lilith guarantees you Lair of Darkness, which is so solid. I love that. I think I'll definitely be messing around with it. The question will be, do you play 2 or 3 Metaverse in those kinds of builds? But we'll just have to see as we go. I'm very excited to get back out and testing with Lair now that Metaverse is back. It's a really nice buff for the deck, so we'll mess around with that. And I think the last one we have today is Pacifist, the Phantasm City. Another deck that I actually think this could be one of the biggest buffs as far as the decks here, the archetypes that like, you know, Metaverse helps the most. This may be the one that gets helped the absolute most. Pacifist is such a strong card. I mean, I know it has its restrictions, and I know it forces you to play like a really, you know, outdated strategy. But if you read Pacifist and what it gives you, this card is pretty insane off of just like itself, essentially. And for that, I think you have to respect it. Like putting up this card with a bunch of traps behind it, that can beat so many decks, even in modern day Yu-Gi-Oh! And the biggest problem with the deck was always consistency. It was like, do you play Planet Pathfinder? But if you do, you can't use any of the pacifist effects that turn, but I guess you still get to it. Okay, but you also had to use your normal. So if you want to normal a token or one of the normal monsters, like that's not great. So you're just trying to look for stuff like that that did like help consistency, but now you just have Metaverse. Just Metaverse out Pacifist. It's another archetype again, and all these archetypes kind of work this way. Any archetype that's specifically built around a field spell, your opponent's first instinct is going to be get that field spell off the field because they need it to beat us and continue getting their engine and advantage rolling, and this is no different. So Metaverse again, like they pop a Pacifist, we can activate a new one, and we're still chilling, like no problem. So this card's crazy. Definitely look into this if you haven't yet. It's a really cool, and you like stun control decks. This is definitely a cool one. But yeah, that's mostly it for today. A lot of cool options here. I'm definitely going to do a little bit of messing around with some of these decks. I'm actually a fan of, I think, all the decks we covered as far as the ones that are helped with Metaverse, because I think they're so cool. Those decks that kind of function so hardly through their field spell. I think they're so interesting and cool and different. This definitely helps. So that's it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. As always, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. Are there any other decks that you think get a nice buff from Metaverse? Are there any generic field spells that I didn't mention here that also could be somewhat interesting as far as like tech options for a deck that might want to mess around with Metaverse? I'd love to hear your thoughts down below on that stuff there. But I'm out of here for today. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Subscribe if you have not yet. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace.